All right, you're listening to 91.5 WUML Lowell Blues Deluxe, and I have the great Lance Lopez with me. How are you, Lance?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on the show. It's such an honor to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you. And like I
Thank
said, I've seen you before when with Lucky once or
Wow.
twice actually. Actually, Lucky played at a place called the Gloucester Blues Festival. I don't know if you were with him when he was there, but I remember the House of Blues show you were with him
Y-
at.
Yeah. Way back in the 90s, mid 90s, probably.
Back in the 90s, right? Now was he the first guy you ever the blues guy you played with for a little while on a tour?
No, I actually went out. Growing up in New Orleans, I played with a lot of guys in New Orleans and then, bounced around from New Orleans to Florida and Texas. But the first guy that took me on the road was Johnny Taylor.
Yeah,
Uh,
oh. Yeah.
the Stax legend,
Yep.
and Who's Making Love and all those songs.
Yep.
And then from there, I would get in these like review type bands. So we were backing guys like Bobby Blue Bland, Little Milton, Johnny Guitar Watson, all those Tyrone Davis, all those kind of singers, and they'd have just the backline band. So that was even more material you had to learn. You not only had to have Johnny's stuff, but we had to have each artist show down. So they would do some of that stuff. So, and then, I got to play with Johnny Guitar Watson and a lot of guys like that. And then from there, Lucky knew I'd done that. And I'd been hanging around the band. I knew the band guys really well. And we were always hanging out and then hitting different blues jams. And finally, the guy that was playing guitar with Lucky Peterson went to work with Sheila E. or Kirk Franklin or something. He had another opportunity. So that was just the way we swapped out. And it was a natural fit because I'd already been playing and hanging out and jamming with the band, and they all loved me. And I knew all the guys already.
So you grew up in New Orleans or in Louisiana, right?
I was born in Louisiana, but I moved to Dallas when I was 12 and then down to New Orleans when I was 14. So I did like this little triangle. I was born in a town called Shreveport, which is in the
Yep.
northwest corner.
I know where that is.
Yeah, a lot of guitar players in Shreveport. A lot of guys, a lot of guitar players there, a lot of great guitar players. And so I went from Shreveport to Dallas to New Orleans and kind of that little triangle.
So how'd you end up playing blues at an early age, or was it an early age when you were starting?
Well, I was always gravitated toward, growing up in the 80s, and that's kind of what led me to this band with everybody, and being in Shreveport. Eddie Van Halen's wife was from Shreveport. So they were together. He lived a mile away from the house. So all the kids in the neighborhood wanted to play like that and in that style. And I naturally was playing minor pentatonic, normally bluesy style guitar. And all the kids were saying, "Oh man, you play too bluesy." And my dad would drive me around Louisiana, and I would see old African American guys on the front porch with an acoustic guitar and the strum doing the real thing. So it was really interesting that I was able to see that and not know what it was, but it was I naturally played that way. And then my dad turned me on to BB King, and we when I moved to Dallas when I was 12, as soon as I landed in Dallas, I looked at the front page of the newspaper and saw the front page was a giant picture of BB King coming to play in concert. So I asked my mother, "Can you take me to see BB King?" And she did. And we got there, and everybody in the entire, it was the Starplex Amphitheater in Dallas, Texas. And literally, and I'm not kidding you, everybody in the concert had a t-shirt that had SRV on it. And I was like, what the hell is SRV?
Yeah.
And why does everybody have this t-shirt on? I had no clue what was going on. I was like, what does that mean? It really was aggravating because literally everybody in the whole building had these t-shirts. And BB King came on. Dr. John was there, a couple other great people. And so Jill Savage was our rock DJ in Dallas on Q102 at that time. And she came out and said, for his hometown performance, we're going to let Stevie Ray Vaughan headline the show. And I was like, who? And then bang, here he came. And I was like, whoa. You know, and he was just like a ball of white light, man. He was like, I'm glad I got to see him, experience him at a time where he was, you know, doing well and clean. I mean, it was 2 months before he died, so he was clean and sober and killing the game. And I mean, just hit me like a lightning bolt out of nowhere. You know, I had no clue who he was or anything about him. So then that's what then made it go. I said, you know what? It's cool to play the blues, because all the shredder kids and the heavy metal kids, as a kid playing guitar, we're making it to where it wasn't cool to do it, you know. And so seeing Stevie Ray Vaughan and BB King jam then made it cool.
No soul in that music.
Yeah. Right.
Where Stevie Ray had soul.
Right. Exactly. So it definitely lent itself to that. And so I just started from the beginning. I went the next day, and I went to some guitar shops around Dallas, and I said, hey, I went and saw this guy last night, Stevie Ray Vaughan. And they were like, oh man. And it was all like the shredder guys. Oh man, they all hang out over at Charlie's guitar shop, man. You need to go over there and hang out with those. Get out of here. Like, get your stuff, you know? And, so I would go every day. Mark Pollock was the owner of Charlie's guitar shop. Bob Falls was in the back. All those guys were there, and Smoking Joe Kubek coming in all the time. And I would go in there, and I'd take all my Jimi Hendrix records under one arm and my wah-wah pedal and my Strat, and I would go over there every day. My mother would drop me off, and Mark would say, hey man, Stevie's on his way home. You know, he'll be here. And it's funny because I just saw Tyrone Vaughn, Jimmy Vaughn's son, was saying the same thing, that we were kind of all waiting on him to get home. And all those guys up at Charlie's were getting ready to introduce me to him. And Tyrone was just talking about this. I just saw Tyrone saying the same thing, that they were looking forward to seeing him when he got home. And then first day of school, like I spent the whole summer at Charlie's waiting on him, and they go, oh, he'll be got a couple more gigs. He's on vacation with his girlfriend, or blah, 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 blah. And man, he can't wait to meet you. You know, we told him about you. And then, you know, first day of school, I went back, pow, helicopter crash. So it was a drag, you know, but man, I got to know Smoking Joe. You know, Smoking Joe was my big brother. And I mean, he was, you know, and he was there for all of it. He saw it, and he was like looking forward to me and meeting Stevie and you know, and so we got to sneak into Poor David's pub. You know, we were 13 years old. David Card would let us go and hide out by the payphone, and in case, you know, back in the payphone days, in case the cops came in, he would go, I told the cops you could come in and use the phone. So go over there. You have to stay by the payphone, and you can't drink. If you drink, I'm going to kick you out. You can never come back again. I was like, and he knew we were just eating, breathing, and sleeping the blues. You know, I had a little buddy of mine who just sadly passed away a few years ago. That was like my little, you know, my first band. He's my bass player, and we were like sidekicks. And we would go and we would sneak, and we would see Anson and the Rockets. Yep. You know, we would go see Anson Funderburg with Sam Myers and Mike Judge playing upright bass, and Bugs Henderson and Albert Collins and Gatemouth Brown. And so Poor David's Poor David's pub was a really, really great place for us to really experience a lot of blues in Dallas early on, in Greenville Bar and Grill as well. So Dallas was a great place to grow up playing Texas blues. It was amazing.
And you got to spend 3 years with Lucky Peterson. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, you know, that was the Dallas connection, right? Like I moved down to New Orleans, became a professional musician, and oddly enough, we moved to South Florida with my dad. We moved from New Orleans down to Florida, and there was a bar there in Port Charlotte that I was playing shows with Derek Trucks and Josh Smith, and we were just kids, you know, we were these little kid guitar players playing these shows. And Lucky would come down there, and he had a connection to St. Petersburg. They had lived in St. Petersburg, Florida for a while. And so that's the first introduction to Lucky I had, was they were coming through, and everybody was just talking about just how ferocious Lucky was. And he was just this beast of a player. And then we moved back to Dallas, and then Lucky was in Dallas, and his entire band was based in Dallas. And I ran into all of them at a club, and I was like, dude, I was just in Florida. So I became friends with his band. Boney Fields, Todd Parsno, Walter Nelson, all these guys, Brent Nance, the guys that were playing it with Lucky Peterson. And so one night they invited me to a jam to jam with them, and they were playing a club called Booker's Arandis, which was in South Dallas. It was in an African American neighborhood. It was a place where BB King would play a concert, and then he would go hang out there after hours. Miles Davis would go hang out there after hours. And so Lucky was playing a show there. And so they were like, come on down, man. And I was like I had just turned 17. And they were like, come on down, man, hang out with us. So Lucky pulled me up at the end of the show, got me up, handed me his guitar, and I started playing. And then everybody went crazy. And as soon as I stepped 1 foot off the stage, Butch Bonner, who used to play guitar with Freddie King in the 70s during the great era, Butch was Freddie King's rhythm player, immediately was in my face, and he was like, hey, man, can you be in Atlanta in 2 days? I was like, what? I got to ask my dad, bro.
Yeah, 17 years old. I got to ask my dad.
I got to ask my dad, man. Can I go to Atlanta in 2 days? And he got me a gig with Johnny Taylor because he was doing the gig. He was building recording studios, so he just gave me to Johnny. And then after I spent about 6-9 months kind of doing the thing with Johnny, we just did the swap. Lucky's original guitar player left, and I just came right in. It was just a natural fit because I was already friends with everybody. So Lucky, man, I mean, he showed me the world. He was just such an immense talent. I mean, not only on the keyboard, but on the guitar. And we spent a lot of time together hanging, playing. He taught me taught me how to play, basics on a Hammond organ, like in a key and keyboard. Lucky sat me down. Hey, man, this is, and just how to be a performer. And, I had spent all that time on the road with Lucky. He really helped me garner my name in Europe. He introduced me to the European audience. But it was when I met Prince with Buddy Miles, and I went down and hung out with Prince, and we jammed, and me and Buddy Miles and Prince jammed. And it was when I met Prince, and I told Prince, because he was like, yeah, man, Buddy, I kind of heard about you, man. Buddy was telling me what's up with you, man. And he was talking about Johnny Guitar Watson. He was like, you need Johnny Guitar, you need to play with you. I said, yeah. I said, but my main gig was Lucky Peterson. And Prince went, and that's when I went, Lucky's a badass. That's when it just finally landed. And I went, when Prince was like, oh my God, when he gasped and stepped back for Lucky, I went, yeah, man, Lucky was great, man.
People don't realize Lucky played B3 and he played guitar, and he split it between the show. Half the show he plays B3, and the guitar player, which was you when I saw him, would play the guitar parts for the songs. Yeah. And then he'd reverse it, and he'd be the guitar player.
Right.
And you play rhythm during that period.
Yeah.
And I saw you at the House of Blues in Cambridge. I remember that.
That's amazing. That was the first House of Blues I think it was the very first House of Blues ever. I mean,
it was, and it was cool. It was his house. It was
literally was a house of blues.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was one of the things that was so cool about it. I mean, and I played, the other Dallas and New Orleans and LA or whatever. And, but I just remember that being a thing, that was the first House of Blues. And that was like the original.
And the sound was great in that little place. I'll tell
you. Absolutely. It was.
And Ronnie Earl was there that night too. You remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I do. That was my introduction to Ronnie Earl. Yeah, the great Ronnie Earl. And Lucky always pulling hijinks on stage and always trying to do some funny stuff. And, he had a lot of fun. Lucky would always have fun on stage.
Yep.
It
was fun to watch, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And it was sad when we lost him. I was really sad when I heard that.
Man, he tried to call me the day before he passed away, and I told him, and I was in the middle, right? So I was in this important situation. I had all these people in my face, and I was like, and Lucky was calling me, and I was like, oh shit, Lucky's calling me. Oh, sorry. I was like, oh wow, Lucky's calling me, and I was like, guys, and I was like, I'll call you right back, and I kept trying to call him, and no answer. And so that's one of the things that really bummed me out, was that he called me literally the day before he passed away, and then I couldn't get him back on the phone. But our last show together was in St. Petersburg, Russia. We played with I brought him over to play with Supersonic Blues Machine, another band I was in.
Yep.
And that was our last show. We got to play at the World Economic Summit in St. Petersburg for world leaders. It was incredible. It was quite a way to go out. Johnny Lang was there. I brought Johnny Lang over with us, and Lucky, and Walter Trout. And it was an incredible situation. But to see him then, when we were in Russia, that was in 2017, and he passed 3 years later, to see him and to see his health, the deterioration, was a lot for me. It was very hard to deal with. And because I knew always, Lucky was always just this fireball on stage. And around 2014 or 15, he had his first heart episode, and he came to me then and said that, and Buddy Miles passed away from the same exact thing, by the way. Buddy Miles had the same situation going on. And it was both where they were on borrowed time. Like the doctor said, you have this X amount of time and that's it. And they both had those talks with me, and it was so difficult. And that's when I did a lot of my grieving and, really hurt. So when they finally passed, it was still very saddening and very hard, but it was almost like, okay, they're not suffering anymore.
I want to ask you about Supersonic Blues Machine. But before we do that, you played with Buddy Miles too. You're talking about him.
Yeah. It's with Buddy. With Buddy. And that, Lucky is who led me to meeting Buddy. We played the Belgium Rhythm and Blues Festival. I don't know what they call it now, but it was in Pierre, Belgium. It's called the BRBF, big festival, and very iconic. And on that festival, that day was Peter Green and Ronnie Earl was on there. Buddy was on it. We were on it. And I met Peter Green that day, which was also very epic. But Buddy was there, and I'd seen him on the schedule, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe Buddy's there. I mean, I was a massive student of the Band of Gypsies and all the work he had done with Hendrix and Carlos Santana and the Fly and Michael Bloomfield, of course. But we were playing, and Buddy came on the side of the stage, and I saw him, and and out of the side of my eye, I could just see him smiling the whole time. He was you could see his teeth, and he was just rocking back and forth. And when I came off the stage, when our set was done, he grabbed me and he hugged me, and he said, man, I could tell by the way you played, you came from the Chitlin circuit. And I'd been, playing that circuit with Johnny Taylor and Little Milton and all those R&B guys.
Yeah, he knew.
He immediately knew. And, when I was on that circuit with Johnny Taylor, all those guys that were there when Jimi Hendrix and Buddy and Billy Cox and all those dudes were playing on it were still there. Because you have to think, I mean, that was in the early mid 60s. This was the early mid 90s, so it would only been 30. It would be like from now to back when we're talking about the 90s, so those guys were all still there, and they all talked. That's how I found out Jimi Hendrix had even been on the Chitlin circuit. I was there, and they were like, when we were measuring Jimi Hendrix suit, and I was like, wait, what? Jimi Hendrix's suit? And that's how I found out Hendrix was there. So that was our connection. I came off the stage, Buddy grabbed me, embraced me, and he was like, I've been looking for you, man. You're the guy. And we hung out all night. We partied. And then he was like, we're going to definitely get together. We're going to make some music. And he was living in New York, man. He packed up everything, came to Texas, moved immediately to Texas. He was there, and within probably 2 months, I mean, he immediately came. We all got back home. He got his stuff, moved to Texas. We were immediately joined at the hip, jamming, working, writing, playing.
Wow.
So it was pretty incredible.
Buddy, you with the Buddy Miles Express, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the Buddy. And we had several different projects. I would go in and out of playing with the Express. We had a short-lived trio with Chuck Rainey, who was a, session bass player that had played with Aretha Franklin and Steely Dan and all these great people. He was kind of the core band with Bernard Purdie and Cornell Dupree and those guys. I'd played, we had a short-lived little band with that. And then then he ended up producing my first record. But yeah, it was the Buddy Miles Express when I was kind of in and out of that, in and out playing with Buddy.
You ever ask him about Band of Gypsies?
Oh my God. I mean, I knew Billy Cox as well. And oh yeah, I mean, we basically, so we lived together. There was a house in Fort Worth. We ended up getting, by the TCU campus, off I-30 in Fort Worth, Texas. And it was just set up with gear like this. I mean, we had the drums in the middle of the house in the living room, and then amplifiers just encircling, and PA just encircling the drum kit. So Buddy was in the middle and we were all around Buddy, and it was just, we would jam for days. And then we would have these big parties and we would jam. And that's where all these ideas and riffs would come from. And my drummer would play drums. Buddy would play bass. Buddy would play guitar. He would take the guitar and flip it upside down and play left-handed. And then when everybody would start leaving, the party, and they had enough and they would start trickling off, Buddy and I would take a twin reverb into the master bedroom. We would put on Star Wars. We would put Star Wars on VHS. And that's what he always talked about. He always said if Jimi Hendrix was alive, he would have been the biggest Star Wars fan of all time. He would have been the biggest Star Wars guy there is. And so we put Star Wars on VHS, and we would take a twin reverb in the room, and he would plug in a bass and we would plug in a guitar. And then he would go, this is how Jimmy and Billy and I would write songs. And then we would sit and just jam on riffs. And then we'd have that riff and then go to another. And, I'll tell you, I still have riffs from those days, from the mid-late 90s, that Buddy and that I've put on literally every album I've ever recorded. And I still have some I've never used. So we had such a wealth of music. And I literally have taken songs like off my catalog, songs like Romeo, songs like Did Ya, songs like, half the Wall of Soul record. I mean, every record I've ever recorded has riffs that Buddy and I wrote during that time. So he talked a lot about that. And he also talked a lot about Michael Bloomfield, and so did Johnny Winter. And I know we'll talk about him in a bit, but they both, there was such a reverence when everybody I knew talked about Bloomfield, and Buddy had an extreme reverence for that, because we would go to parties and we would hang out. And of course that was always the question, or Santana. That was the other one. He had worked so much with Carlos, and there was always so much of that, but he kind of got where he was, always talking about Hendrix. It kind of wore him out. And he really would turn and look at me and go, man, Michael was the guy, and really digging into the Electric Flag and like the blues stuff that they were doing, and just the blues guitar player that Michael Bloomfield is pretty phenomenal. And that was my introduction to Mike Bloomfield. I knew Mike Bloomfield's work. I knew who he was, but it wasn't until I sat with Buddy Miles, who was his drummer, who was one of his best friends, who really sat me down and fully educated me on
during the Electric Flag period.
Absolutely. He really it really educated me about Michael Bloomfield.
So we're going to talk about Johnny Winter, but I want you to tell me about the Supersonic Blues Machine, one of my favorite records that you put out back in 2012. How did that come about? I know you had Kenny Aronoff on drums too.
Yeah. Oh, it was a good time. Well, I had done some records. I'd been working with Jim Gaines, and Jim and I had done a couple of records. And I loved Jim. I mean, he was like, I called him Uncle Jim. He was like my uncle. And, we had done 2 records for a label I was on in Germany, and we were recording at Ardent, and I was trying to shift into a different vibe, and I was touring Europe so much on those records that Jim and I had done. And all of these guys in Europe were telling me I needed to work with this producer, Fabrizio Grazzi. He was from Milan. He was a bass player, and he was an Italian guy, from Milan, from Milan, Italy, kind of the seat of fashion and all that kind of, area of Italy. And he had worked with all these big rock guys. So people kept coming at me and telling me I needed to do this. Well, I got home from a tour, and I needed to make a record. I was like, it was new record time. And I was like, I wanted a different feel. These guys were telling me to work with him. And I knew a journalist named Tony Connolly that introduced me to Fabrizio Grazzi. So I went to LA. I'd been playing a lot of shows out there, and was on the road, and Fabrizio said, "Hey man, when you're here, come by." And we got in the studio. I had some ideas. I sent him some stuff from Dallas, when I was in Texas. I sent him some ideas over, and we got in the studio, and things started happening just immediately. So we said, okay, cool, let's do a record. Well, we started cutting tracks, and I was going back and forth from Dallas to LA and Dallas to LA. And we eventually, midway through, somehow or another, it turned into a band situation. Billy Gibbons had called him and said, hey, he wanted to work on something with Fabrizio. And he said, well, I'm working with Lance. And so he was like, wow. And so we started working on a track with Billy Gibbons. And then once people found out we were working with Billy, then this guy wanted to come over, and this guy. And I said, man, let me just reach out to my friends and see if they want to, be on the record. And, wow. And then it turned into a band, and Kenny was playing drums on it. And, we were recording a lot in the same studio. And so it worked, and I got to go out and create some really cool music with a lot of the great guitar players that were my good friends, and Billy and I had been talking about doing something together at that point for at least 20 years. I mean, we had been saying for 2 decades, because I'd known Billy since I was, a teenager. And Billy always was like, oh, I'm going to produce a record on you. And this was the height of ZZ was still, ZZ Top was still just, I mean, they were immense. And Billy always told me that ever since I was a kid, I want to produce a record on you. I want to produce a record on you. So finally, when Supersonic but they were so busy, ZZ Top being such a thing. And Gibbons is a very, eccentric cat, and he's always into different things. When that finally happened, that's kind of what it was for us, for Gibbons and I, was kind of a finally situation. And, it was a fun time. It was great. Robin Ford was there. My big brother, Steve Lukather, came in from Toto, who's, literally, I mean, he's like my big bro, and things were getting things got weird like they do in bands. But when Luke was there, it was like, okay, my big brother's here, and he would tell everybody, he'd protect little bro, and that really, it was so special to me. I mean, Luke's literally like my big brother. So that's how that kind of went. And unfortunately, just some financial issues and other things just kind of led to me no longer working with him. But it was a good time. And those 2 records, I'm really proud of them. I worked very, very hard on them. I worked very hard in the studio on those records, and I'm really proud of what we did.
And you went to Russia with them. That's crazy.
We went to Russia. We went to India. Billy and I were in Mumbai. Billy was like Anthony Bourdain over there. I mean, he was like, we were like, and Billy was like, man, the Beatles came to India. He's like, we're like the Beatles, man.
Oh, that's cool.
We went to India. So we got to go to India. We played in Mumbai. We got to play some really cool places. We were in Scandinavia. We were in Norway, and Billy Gibbons and I were on the front of the bus in the big observatory kind of thing in the front of the tour bus. And we were talking, he was telling me some really heavy stuff about some real deep ZZ Top business stuff, publishing and all this, real heavy shit. And I'm sorry. He was telling me all this real heavy stuff. And I'm sitting on the front of the bus with him. And all of a sudden we're talking, all of a sudden there's a giant moose on the side of and Billy goes, oh my God, a moose. There's a moose standing there. We're like, whoa. So we had some fun adventures in the Supersonic Blues Machine. It was a good time. It was a really good time. And you're playing with Kenny was great. Don Was brought Ringo Starr out to see us in Detroit, and Ringo was there hanging out, and Don Was, and it was great playing with Robin Ford and all those guys. It was a really, really great experience. I learned a lot from all those guitar players too, because when I was with them, every one of them, Walter Trout, Robin Ford, Steve Lukather, all the guys we played with, of course, Billy, of course, I always said, hey, teach me something. I want to take a lesson. And they would go, what? And I'd go, I want something. Give me one little thing that I can add to my situation.
Repertoire, right.
You can never stop learning.
Yep.
And when you get around greatness like that, that is really the time to ask, and I unabashedly, hey, can you teach me something? I'm the student here, and I forever remain teachable. So that's one of the approaches that I had in Supersonic Blues Machine.
So what was it like to meet Peter Green?
It was an interesting experience, man. He really didn't talk.
That was the 90s. I remember. I saw him.
It was interesting, man. And it really, I'd walk to him. He was standing in the backstage. He had a Strat, and I was really shocked that he was playing a Strat because, I knew him from the original
his Gibson that he played.
The real Fleetwood Mac, as I call it.
Right.
No offense to Stevie Nicks and the chick band that came out later, but I call it the real Fleetwood Mac. He played the Greenie Les Paul that what's his name in Metallica has now.
Kirk Hammett.
That Kirk is playing. Kirk's playing the Greenie, and Gary Moore had it after, that's right.
Yeah, after he gave it to Gary Moore, and Gary paid him, I don't know, nothing. Very little for it.
I saw Gary play that guitar, and that was when I got to see Greenie. I saw Gary just destroy it with that guitar. It was incredible. But I was really shocked, and he was, he was quite large, and he had this little, the Strat looked little, and he was standing, and he was just staring, he was just standing backstage, and I walked up to him, and I just said, Peter Green, my name's Lance Lopez, and I was just a kid. I mean, I was 18, 19 years old, and I was like, you're one of my biggest heroes, and oh well, was incredible. Rattlesnake Shake. I go, man, like, you're my hero. And he was standing there, and he kind of smiled a little bit, but he just was. Yep. And I just walked away. I literally had like tears in my eyes. I was like, what happened to Peter Green?
Yeah.
And they just kind of walked him on the stage and put him up there, and it was hard to watch. It was hard to watch.
Yeah, I remember seeing him around that period of time.
Yeah.
When he was with the Splinter Group, and he was like, He didn't say much. He didn't say very much, but
that was it. Yeah. Splinter Group.
So then let's talk about another guitar player that you've known, and what'd you learn from him, Mr. Johnny Winter?
Oh man. Oh man. Yeah. That was my buddy, man. I miss Johnny every day. I mean, he was my good buddy. I mean, the two guys that I hung with the most and really had the most, Buddy Miles, Johnny Winter, and Johnny and I I just remember us drinking chocolate milkshakes, eating French fries, you know, and listening to all the blues. And he was such a wealth of information when it came to all the Delta guys, you know, the Chicago stuff. But like, I mean, Blind Willie Johnson, Blind Willie McTell, Robert Johnson, any one of them, Son House. He could tell you almost like their day-to-day lives. I mean, he knew where, like, but especially like, I think it was Blind Willie Johnson, because I think he was down from around Beaumont. I think he died down there, but he just knew all the history of like where they lived and what happened to them and where they're buried and how they died and what was going on with them and just their struggle. And I mean, imparted so much information, and that's what we would do. I mean, we were on the bus, we would just sit and listen to that stuff. And then, you know, we would get done with the sound check or whatever. And, you know, Paul Nelson would bring in the Firebird, and he would show me some slide licks. That's how I literally started playing slide. I mean, I had somewhat kind of played slide guitar before that, but it wasn't until I sat down with Johnny, you know, on the motorhome, you know, and when we had time, when they were inside doing whatever they were doing in the venue, and he would walk me through a lot of stuff, and here, try this, here, try that. I don't know why you do that. And he had no explanation. He goes, this is just how I play it. This is just what I know. And he would play it and go, just try that out and see what, you know. And he goes, and the other thing was, Johnny was really, this was my experience, Johnny was really shocked as to why I would want to learn that. Like, why? And that was Johnny's always thing. Why would you want to do that? That was his Johnny Winter's famous thing of, well, why would you want to do that? You would do something and he would go, well, why would you want to do that? You know? And that was how he approached it. Like, why do you want to learn?
You always wanted to learn something. You always wanted to learn something.
Yeah. And he's like, why would you want to learn how to play slide guitar from me? I'm like, are you serious? So, and a funny story, I had a buddy of mine, Chuck Kavoris, in Los Angeles. He kind of became like adopted dad to me. He was a big blues guy out in LA, and everybody loved him. And you know, Slash and all those guys grew up going and seeing Chuck play. And Chuck learned a Highway 61 note for note in the 80s, and played and recorded it with like half of Guns N' Roses, you know, the band at the time, whoever was in Guns N' Roses. And they recorded a version of Highway 61, and he sent it to him, and he goes, please play this for Johnny. And they're playing it note for note. I mean, they're literally nailing the whole thing. And Teddy Zigzag, you know, who plays keys with Slash and plays with Walter Trout now, he was singing it. And so I sat there, I played the recording for Johnny, and the whole time Johnny's going, wow. And he's playing Johnny's slide parts, and he goes, why would anybody want to ever copy me? Why would you want to? and like, no clue. And we're going, Johnny, because you're Johnny Winter, you know, because you're Johnny. And he'd go, why would you want to do that? You know, we were like, what? It was mind blowing. And he had no clue how influential he really was.
Yeah, he was.
He had no concept of how influential he was. He didn't. It was amazing.
So let's talk about Two Wolf, the new thing you got going.
Yeah. Well, you know, that, and it's oddly enough how I got brought into this, and sadly, you know, us just losing Rick Derringer yesterday, that connection is what brought me into Two Wolf. Oddly enough. There's a drummer that played with Rick Derringer, God rest his soul, for many years, named Tommy Curiali. And Tommy played drums with Rick. And I had the connection with them because Charlie Torres, the bass player, played in the Buddy Miles Express. So there was the big connection.
Yeah, all the connections.
So Charlie, I'd played with Charlie with Buddy Miles. And then Charlie is the one who introduced me to Rick and Tommy. And meeting Rick Derringer was like, oh my God, this is amazing. You know, big hero always. And so we all became friends. And so when they were in Dallas, doing whatever. Rick would be at the hotel with his wife and resting and hanging out. And so I would go out with Tommy, the rhythm section, and I would go play with him. You know, we would go out to blues jams and hang out. Well, lo and behold, about 15 or 20 years later, many years later, Tommy ends up playing with Johnny Winter. And that was incredible. So Johnny hires Tommy, and then we all end up on the road together with Johnny Winter, and I'm on tour, and I'm like, you know, here's my bro Tommy that I've known that was in Rick Derringer's band for many, many years. So, and then, you know, they went to Europe for a brief tour. I was touring in the States, and then I was supposed to meet them in the UK and do an entire UK tour and then go back to Europe, and Johnny passed away. And so that was a hard loss. That was very, very difficult. Still, I miss him every day. It's still difficult. But about 6 months after Johnny passed, Tommy called me, and the band had kind of just, you know, they disintegrated. Paul Nelson was trying to keep some tribute shows happening, you know, a couple of years after, or a couple of months after Johnny died, using some of the leftover tour dates. And I played on some of those with the guys. But Tommy called me, and he said, Greg T. Walker, who is the former bass player of Blackfoot, is putting together a band. And I went, oh man, Blackfoot. I know Train. I know Highway Song.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Texas and Louisiana, and I mean, those are still on FM classic rock radio. I mean, those are anthems, and you know, where I grew up. And I was like, of course. I mean, Train was badass. And you know, one of the key things was, I remember in the late 80s reading the Rip magazines and the Hit Parader and all the rock and metal magazines, and the Metallica guys were saying, I remember James Hetfield of Metallica saying their two biggest influences early in Metallica were Motorhead and Blackfoot. And I went, and I'm thinking Highway Song, and I'm going like, what? And it didn't make sense to me at all. I mean, Train.
Yeah, well, listen to some of Metallica's stuff, and it does sound a little bit like that stuff.
I mean, when I joined Two Wolf and I dug into their deep cuts, I went, oh my God, it's come 100% early Metallica. I mean, you listen to Kill 'Em All and Master Puppets and Ride the Lightning. I was like, it totally makes sense that they were listening to Blackfoot.
Yep.
It was like, there it is right there. So it totally made sense at that time. And it didn't when I was a kid, because, you know, they were a thrash metal band.
Right.
And then it's like, you think of Blackfoot now as being one of the predecessors to thrash metal. So it's pretty funny. But so he called me, Tommy Curiale called me, and he said, hey, Greg's putting together this band, you know, and I was like, absolutely. He goes, I got another guitar player down here in Florida. And they flew me down to Florida. And we started playing. We got the room. We played Train, and it was like, oh man, this could be cool. And you know, I was working on trying to get some things together with them, and then Supersonic Blues Machine just snowballed so quickly. You know, Supersonic Blues Machine just started to erupt rapidly. You know, we were signed to Mascot Pro Vogue. And that first record, that West of Flushing, South of Frisco record, came out, and then I had to step away. I was like, man, we had tour dates coming up. You know, Billy Gibbons and I were getting in the room and working out guitar, and I didn't have the time to dedicate it, so I had to bow out. I was like, man, I'm sorry guys, but I got this other thing that I'm doing, and so the guy that replaced me when I originally left, Kris Bell, came from an American Idol stars band, a guy named Bo Bice.
Yeah, I remember him.
He was in the Carrie Underwood era of American Idol, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So Kris was his lead guitar player. So Kris toured, and it was all part of that whole American Idol hoo-ha that was happening back then, and they were all over the place, and you know, they were out doing it really large after American Idol. I mean, they were out doing some pretty major stuff. And so Kris was on the road with Bo. He was part of his core band of guys. He was like his homeboys. And so once that all kind of fizzled out, I left, went to Supersonic. Kris came and replaced me. from you know, in the band. So it's really funny now that now I'm in the band with my replacement. So, and that's what Greg wanted. Greg was always thinking, man, if I could get both of these guys
Yep.
in the band together, it'd be great. And that's what ended up happening. So I, you know, lo and behold, things had happened, and I'd put some records out, and I ended up moving here to Nashville. And I came to Nashville, and Phil McCormick from Molly Hatchet passed away. Phil was the lead singer of Molly Hatchet. And the Molly Hatchet guys were also friends of ours. I mean, we're all family with all those guys. Lynyrd Skynyrd, Molly Hatchet, Blackfoot, 38 Special. I mean, we're all, you know,
Yep.
I'm all part of the family. And so those are all our dear friends. And Phil McCormick was the lead singer of Molly Hatchet, and he passed away. And I called Greg, and that's what reconnected me with Greg T. Walker. I called him. I said, man, Phil McCormick passed, and we got to talking. And then he said, hey man, if you want to come back and play with us, I'd be honored to have you. And I was in Nashville, and I was like, man, and I was taking a big break for a minute. And I said, you know what? That would be amazing. And then COVID happened. They had some other guys. They were trying to figure out a lineup, and, you know, they were trying to figure out, solidify things, and things were kind of just, they were this guy, that guy, this guy, that guy. And then when COVID happened, right when we said, okay, here's the deal, we're going to do this, me, Chris, you know, Greg T. Walker, drummer, we're going to do this 4-piece. Right when we made that decision, COVID happened. We were like, what? You know?
Yeah.
So Kris Bell and I he came to my house here in Nashville, and we just sat around the fireplace. We'd build a fire in the fireplace. COVID was happening. Things were crazy. And we'd build a fire in the fireplace, and we'd sit around with guitars, and we'd play. We'd plug into Marshalls, and, you know, we had the living room full of, you know, Marshall stacks, and we would jam out, and we wrote Blessed and the Cursed, which is the closing track of the new record. We wrote that song immediately. The guys from Three Doors Down wanted to record it, and I went, nope, we're going to keep it for a 2. Once they heard the work tape of Chris and I, what we were working on, my good friends in that band, they wanted to record it. So I knew we were onto something there. And then, so we acted as if. So Chris and I would just get together at the house, because Chris is also here in Nashville. And we just started working as if. And so we finally got on stage in early 2022 when the Rock Legends Cruise came back. And so the Rock Legends Cruise is kind of our home, stage. You know, we play that cruise every year. They've played it. Greg's played it every year with kind of a different lineup of guys. But we have played as Two Wolves since 2022, and that's where this inception of the solidified, finalized band has made our home. And we've kind of cut our teeth on that boat every year, honing the band. And right after that first run we were out with Blue Oyster Cult and Deep Purple and a bunch of other great bands. And when Roger Glover and Ian Pace of Deep Purple came and saw us, that's when I went, okay. And they were blown away. Roger Glover from Deep Purple was just, you know, totally blown away, and was just 100% complimentary. Ian Pace loved the band. That's when I knew, okay, we got to make a record immediately. You know, we got to do something now, like quickly. And we got back and we started making plans. And so I contacted a good friend of mine here named Nettie Freed. And Nettie's grandfather was Alan Freed. Alan Freed coined the term rock and roll, right? Invented the word. And her dad is a big music publisher in LA. And Nettie had moved here from Los Angeles. And she would, like a lot of people moved from LA to Nashville, especially during COVID. And Nettie moved here from LA, and her husband, and who's in the movie business, and they opened a studio. And so they had this property in Lebanon, Tennessee, where they had a luxury home, and then they had the recording studio next to it. So we were able to live on the property and record. And when I knew that Nettie had that, I went, this is the perfect place for Two Wolf to come and record and make a record. So we got to live on site in a big, nice house, big band house. And like they used to do it back in the old days. And the recording studio was right next door. And, you know, it was much different than the supersonic blues machine stuff, where it was like you cut a track and then everybody's emailing their tracks in, and, you know, it's this virtual thing and nobody's in the room together. With Two Wolf, we set up the Marshalls in the room and everybody got in there like the good old days, and we made a rock and roll record like all those old bands used to. And so that was one of the most fun things that we that was able to come out of the record.
So has the record come out yet, or is it coming out?
June 6th, it's coming out. So we're just a few days away from its initial release. So the record will be out on Cleopatra on June 6th.
Great. So Lance, how do people find out about you?
Well, they can find out about me at lancelopezguitarist.com. I'm also on Instagram at Lance Lopez Guitarist, and Facebook at Lance Lopez Band and Lance Lopez TX. But my main site is lancelopezguitarist.com. And then Two Wolf is twowolfrocks.com. And we're also on Instagram as Two Wolf Official, and also on Facebook. So you can definitely find us there. But our two websites, twowolfrocks.com, lancelopezguitarist.com. And we have all our information updated, and we continue. We love to hear from everybody, and we love to connect.
Well, Lance, I just want to say thank you for taking almost an hour of your time. It's great.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for having me. And it's such an honor to be on such a long running blues show. You know, I'm a blues kid at heart. I'm a blues guitar player at heart. That's my roots. That's where I come from. That's what I do with my band.
Like I said, you're the blues guy in this rock band.
So it's an honor to be on your show, brother. Thank you.
It's an honor to have you, and I look forward to catching you if you come to New England.
Yeah, we're working on it. I know we're going to be up pretty close this summer, but we're working on some dates. We'll be up there later in the year or early next year.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again. Have a great day. Thank you again.
You too. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.